commemorate the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations next year with 70 celebratory activities including cultural, religious and trade promotion events beside military exchanges. The events were finalized in line with the understanding reached by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping during their second informal summit at Mamallapuram on October 11th and 12th this year. The activities include the two sides holding joint cultural performances at various border posts, visits of Indian naval ships as well as mid-level tri-service delegation of the Indian Armed Forces to China. Besides hosting parliamentary exchanges, the two countries will conduct various activities to trace civilizational links. On the business and trade front, China will hold a China-India Trade and Investment Cooperation Forum in India and organize the second China-India Drug Regulation. The first forum was held in China. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the bilateral relationship between India and China. Joining me on the program today are Vishnu Prakash, former ambassador, Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, retired Director, India Foundation, and Srikant Kondapalli, Professor, Chinese Studies, JNU. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. First, let's try and take stock of where Sino-Indian ties stand at the moment.
Well, if we compare over a period of, let's say, the last 30 years, there has been a lot of movement in the relationship. The relationship has broadened. We are trying to enhance people-to-people contacts. Economic ties are grown. At the same time, the gulf in perception remains, and the big challenge remains that China is not comfortable with the rise of India. So that is the strategic gulf between the two countries. On the positive side, high-level exchanges have become quite regular, and this format of informal summits between Prime Minister of India and the Chinese President is a very good format. They in fact meet 3 to 4 times a year either on a bilateral basis or on a multilateral, plurilateral fora. So we can see that there are two things going in parallel. There is more engagement, yet on the major issues, the core issues, the gulf remains. Frank?
Okay, all right. On the core issues, the gulf remains is what the ambassador is suggesting. Professor, ever since the Chennai Connect, have some of these gulfs been bridged? Have some of the differences, been, have we overcome some of those differences?
I think the decision for the 70 events to be conducted on the 70th anniversary is to basically have a cushioning effect in the bilateral relations, since we have not resolved any core interests. For example, the territorial dispute, for example, the Kashmir and the Chinese activism on 370 article removal, or on the other aspects like on terrorism, NSG, nuclear supplies group, or any other such core interests. Since we have not been able to resolve, given the exuberance of the two countries in their economic and military strength, I think this is an effort to provide some kind of a cushion by bringing in the soft elements like the cultural aspects, the commerce, the visits by the armed forces. So this is one way of cushioning the bilateral relations. So nothing wrong in it, and let us see how it goes with the interactions at various levels. If tourism increases, as is expected with the multiple entry visa granted by India for tourism purposes for 5 years, or the 10-pillar agreement that was signed during Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit last December, where we have planned to have activities like think tank, media forum, museum management, sports, youth exchanges, or Chinese language teachers in India, or the other aspects of the 10-pillar agreement. I think this could probably provide for a more understanding between the two peoples and increase the number of visits, etc. So, given the larger picture of US-China trade war and the developments in the neighborhood in terms of Hong Kong, in terms of Xinjiang, Tibet, and other issues, China also needs to have a breathing space at this moment and would not like to see a Doklam kind of situation on the border. So, in other words, this kind of celebration, year of friendship, book exhibitions, etc., will also create some kind of a cushion overall.
Okay.
So, I think it is that space that is needed at the moment.
Okay, all right. So we need some kind of cushion going forward, and probably some of the softer issues can have a bearing on some of the more, core issues and the bigger problems is what you're suggesting. But as far as China is concerned, General, how much is China willing to work with India to try and sort out some of these differences?
It is my view that the problems which we really have with China are not capable of resolution in the short term, and I don't even think they are capable of resolution in the middle term. When you're looking at specifically at, let us say, the border dispute, I don't think that China is going to compromise in any way on what they claim, and there is no way that India is going to compromise either. So I think it suits both countries as of now to say, okay, if we cannot compromise, if we cannot change our stance, then let us at least agree to continue working the way we are, and leave it, as one of the former Chinese premiers said, leave it to future generations to solve. Now, that is one way of going about it. Of course, it also has its drawbacks, because people say that unless we have a demarcated border, there are many things which we would like to do which we cannot do. There will always be that possibility of tension, of hostility, ki, okay, the border is not demarcated, so what are you going to do? And there will always be that measure of distrust, but I think we'll have to live with that. The second point, I think, what the ambassador brought out, and what in a sense also the professor has very clearly brought out, I think there is an element of concern within China of India's rise. And while India does not see it in that manner, I think the Chinese really view us as a very major potential competitor, and the Chinese are seeking by 2050 a unipolar world by which they will be the leaders. Now, here they are faced with a situation by which even in Asia, it is not going to be a unipolar Asia. So, to a very large extent, I feel what the Chinese have done is, right, and this policy has been going on from the 60s, and it has become stronger since then. They have consistently used Pakistan to use Pakistan as a wedge against India, to keep India confined to South Asia so that it does not rise to be a competitor. Now, that policy actually has been informed in such a manner that when you're looking at Chinese support to Pakistan in cross-border terrorism, when you're looking to their support in what is happening in when we abrogated Article 35A and the provisions of 370, when we are looking at their stance on terrorism, when we wanted some people to be declared as terrorists and they have dithered, when you're looking at us, when we need support to be a part of the Security Council in the UN, it is the Chinese, or at NSG, or any of those issues, China is not going to allow it to happen. But if it does happen, at least they will resist to all their might. And Pakistan plays a major role. So I don't see any of those things changing. But then, as the professor very rightly said, when you're having these 70 events, I think over a period of time, what is really going to happen is the people-to-people connect will increase. Today, we have a very sorry situation by which the number of Indian tourists who are going to China is quite large. But the number of Chinese tourists coming to India is significantly much smaller. So I think we need to actually have this, once this cultural cross-current start, this cross-pollination, so to say, starts, and if, say, millions of Chinese start coming to India and seeing what is happening here, and similarly millions of Indians also go to China despite the language barrier. I think in some sense, when businesses develop, when businesses' interests develop, you develop core constituencies in both the countries to say, listen, let us resolve the issues. These are not short-term steps.
Sure.
I believe they will take some time, but I think this is the right thing to do. and the post the Chennai summit and Mamlapuram, I think it has at least set the stage. And as very rightly been said earlier, it is a very significant feature that the two leaders are meeting without any staff, without any pre-planned agenda. So because you don't have an agenda, you cannot have a loss or a win.
Okay.
I think that's very important, because when we set our stakes too high, like every time we say, okay, why don't we have peace? We haven't had peace for so long, at least, but we haven't been firing either.
Sure.
So let us look at it both ways, and I think it's going to take time.
Okay.
And to that extent, I think this is a very welcome step.
Okay. Since we are talking about the Wuhan and since we are talking about the Chennai Connect, Ambassador, I'd like to ask you, have the informal summits, especially between India and China, been far more constructive than the traditional meetings that we've had in the past? Is this a format that is working between the two countries?
Well, I will still reserve my judgment on whether or not it has been constructive, because as my co-panelists have also acknowledged and I underlined, there is that basic gap between our core interests and theirs. China wants their core interests to be respected, but is not reciprocating in terms of respecting India's core interests. In fact, their gap, frankly, is growing. My co-panelists had listed out a number of areas where there are divergences, serious divergences. Recent one can add is what happened in Bangkok during the RCEP negotiations, or the summit meeting where RCEP was discussed, and China pulled a fast one on us. So that we have to park that bit, that there is that huge gap. Now that said, let us compare what happens in the informal summits and the regular summits. I've sat into regular summits. It typically means 45 minutes to 1 hour of a structured meeting, not even an interaction, where each side reads out from pre-prepared texts. There is hardly any discussion, there is a strict agenda, and that's about it. If there is a meeting which is happening on the margins of a multilateral fora, or if it's a bilateral visit, I mean, you throw in a dinner, you throw in a lunch, you throw in 15 minutes of tete-a-tete. So there is normally 2.5 to 3 hours of interaction or face time between the leaders. So as against that, 6 to 8 hours of unstructured dialogue, where you are discussing everything, and as General Katoj said, without any expectations of a result. You don't have to showcase anything. You don't have to say it's, that this has been the yield of the dialogue. So willy-nilly it enhances understanding. I mean, that there is no doubt about it. Now again, I'm afraid I have to come back to that. What it eventually translates into remains to be seen, because their view has to be taken primarily by China, whether in the China-centric regional order that they are trying to create, what is the role that they are willing, I mean, not that we are accepting their thing, but what is the role that they are willing to have India play. Okay. Therein lies the whole issue or the disconnect. But that said, I would again say that in terms of optics, in terms of enhancing people-to-people understanding, it's a good initiative to say, here is the 70th anniversary, two neighbors are going to have 70 events to commemorate that important landmark in the relationship.
Okay,
Frank.
All right. So, Professor, as far as China is concerned, what is it that China expects out of India really, as far as the region itself is concerned, and is there a time in the future where you see both India and China collaborating on major issues in the region?
Well, the Chinese maximalist expectation from India is some kind of an alliance, like we saw in Hindi-Chini Bye-Bye phase in 1950s when we established
but we saw what happened after
diplomatic
that.
relations. So that is the Chinese expectation, that they would like to have a stable periphery, and India not saying anything in regard to its core interests probably even giving up Arunachal Pradesh or the other listening to China on Kashmir. So that is the maximalist expectation that China has on those. I think the Chinese are facing a lot of flack because the 19th Party Congress mentioned in October 2017 about China occupying the center stage. General Katoch mentioned about the unipolar world where China wants to be at the center. That was the decision taken at the 19th Party Congress 2 years ago. And the Chinese are dishing out a community of shared destiny, a Belt and Road Initiative, and new type of international relations in their own language, in their own culture. So they would like to have every other country to be participant to this. Of course, India has its own, as 1.3 billion people. You can't simply bandwagon somebody else. So to that extent, I think on the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, India has a different view. On Arunachal Pradesh, obviously it has a different view. There is a parliament resolution. There is also on Kashmir, there is a parliament resolution. And the constitutional aspects. So these are Indian, differences with China on this. In terms of what the Chinese expect India to be, they would like India to be part of BRI. They would like India to be part of the community of shared destiny. They would like India to also have a major role to play in the new type of international relations in the Chinese perception. Are India and China working together in fact, there are so many areas. Climate change, for example, in the basic format, Brazil, South Africa, India, China format, they have been advocating what is called as equal but differentiated responsibilities. Equal, every other country on earth having responsibility, but differentiated because we are least industrialized. So we need to have that space for industrialization, expanding manufactured sector, and so on and so forth. Secondly, we're working in the BRICS. Recently, we had the Brasilia meeting where there were several decisions taken by these 5 leaders. So in multipolarity, we are working together. In terms of the United Nations Charter as the basis and non-interference policies as the basis. We are also working in other multilateral institutions like SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, East Asian Summit. In economic areas, we are working in many multilateral fora. WTO, for example, we have various deals with the Chinese where we fight for the G7 countries. So in fact, there are so many areas that we are working together with China.
Right.
Of course, the bilateral part is problematic, and these celebrations would probably provide some understanding in the longer run.
Sure. Okay. All right. So, General, as far as Xi Jinping is concerned, there are several domestic problems that he is dealing with. The first one being Hong Kong, everything that's been happening there for the last 6 months. There's also the issue of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. So these are some of the domestic issues that he's facing. And let's not forget the trade war between the United States and China. So are all these issues also playing on the mind of the President Xi Jinping? And does he want to improve ties going forward with India? Because all of this is having an impact on the Chinese economy as well. So that also has to be taken care of by the Chinese establishment.
One of the things was that China desperately wanted India to join the RCEP, right? Because it would have given them unfettered access to the Indian markets. And but they don't want to reciprocate in the same manner because when it comes to our pharmaceuticals or to our IT sector, then China puts various roadblocks into it. So you see, for China, it is always a one-way street. You do it my way and we are friends. As very rightly said by one of my colleagues earlier, is that Chinese will always be friends with you so long as you don't oppose them, which means that if you let them have their way, they'll be friends. But then anybody will be friends that way. I think China has got very major concerns as far as the trade war is concerned, because their economy is suffering. And despite what many people say, Donald Trump's actions against China on the trade front have severely impacted China. Now, people say that China is big enough, they'll get out of it. That is true. They will get out of it. But the point is that they have suffered, and there is a limit to which they can suffer, because if it leads over a period of time to upheaval in the job sector in the Chinese mainland, where about 10 million or 20 million or 30 million people lose their jobs, it becomes a matter of serious concern. You see, for the first time now, people are actually looking at China in a different way, especially as to what has happened in Uyghurs in Xinjiang province. Now, here you have taken the entire population, the Muslim males, and you have put them into internment camps. And we have a very strange situation that the Muslim world is quiet. We don't find any of the regular Muslim countries speaking about the atrocities being committed on their fellows. But the West has taken it up now. I think there is a very remarkable shift that for the first time the Western world has started talking about it. The US has started talking about it. India at the moment is still quiet. But when you look at what they are happening to the Uyghurs, I think the bigger shame is that the Chinese, Han Chinese, they have actually started using the Uyghur women. And they have advertised it. They have said it is for better, I'm forgetting the word which they use, but really for better cooperation or integration of the word, for better integration between the two. Now that is not done. And I think at some point of time, even countries like Pakistan, if we advertise this fact enough, is going to lead to greater problems with what China is facing as far as the CPEC is concerned. You know, this China-Pakistan economic corridor, I think, is going to become a very major concern for China, because in my view, it can never actually see the lights of day. Sure. We are going to have very serious problems in Balochistan, where the insurgency is only going to rise. We are going to have even more serious problems in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and Gilgit-Baltistan is not too happy. So when we are looking at that entire route going from Xinjiang on to Gwadar, we are looking at a picture which is not a very comfortable picture.
Okay.
So those are the problems which I think they're going to face. There are going to be very serious concerns. And the final concern which China has, in my view, is what is happening on the Indian Ocean. You see, when we are looking at the Quad, the cooperation between India, the United States, Japan and Australia, I agree that there is no major cooperation as of now. But that doesn't really matter. It is the potential which it creates, which can be done up in a very, very short period of time, which can actually neutralize all Chinese actions. I think that is a matter of concern. Now, while China doesn't want India to cooperate with America on issues like this, they are not willing to address, as the professor very rightly said, and the ambassador said, Indian concerns.
Sure.
Because we are concerned about what they're doing with Pakistan, and their strategic alliance with Pakistan, I think, is a major cause of concern to us.
Okay. All right. Time now to get closing comments from all my panelists. All right. Starting first with you, Ambassador, with the best way forward, what is it that we can expect over the next year or year and a half?
Well, for us, it is very important to manage the relationship. China, we have a 4,000 kilometer border with China. As it was mentioned, there is an undelineated border where there is a lot of potential for misunderstandings. We do not want doklums. We do not want further gap in strategic gap in the understandings between the two countries. So it is frankly in India's interest to engage China, try to narrow the divergences, and that is what we are attempting to do. Once again, I would say that, you know, this decision to have 70 celebrations to mark the anniversary, it's a positive decision. We are both civilizational societies, and certainly if there is a better understanding between the youth of India and China, between the strategic community, the academia, it will help. But it is going to be a parallel track. We'll build on what we can build, but we need to keep our guard up, because I don't see in the short or medium or even in the longer term China to be a friend at best. It will be a country with which we will have continuous dialogue, and we will try to have engage China and have we'll have cooperate. Well, we'll have decent ties. That's the hope that we have.
Okay, all right, Professor.
I think in the next 1.5 years, we will continue to have good relations, in the sense that the Wuhan spirit, Chennai Connect, and possibly another city in China, the third summit meeting. it did result in positive developments in the bilateral relations because we just had about 3 minor incidents on the border, one on the Pangongso Lake, one on the Asafila area in Arunachal Pradesh. So we have not had major events on the border despite not being delineated, demarcated or defined border line of actual control. Secondly, we would expect the Chinese to bridge their trade deficits, which is a whopping $750 billion in the last 10 years. Since Trump had raised the tariff wars, if the Chinese do not want India also to join this bandwagon of raising tariffs on the Chinese products, they should reduce the trade deficit, which means basically invite or giving level playing field for our pharmaceuticals and software packages. Also in the RCEP, the original document suggested to equitable distribution and differences to be bridged, but that has not happened. So we would expect the RCEP process also to be in more justified manner, that the concerns of countries which are trying to export needs to be the countries of origin, the tariff related aspects, the trade
all
deficits
needs to be factored
in.
Sure.
In the next 1.5 years, obviously, we'll also would like to see some kind of economic projects to be undertaken and realize some of the CBMs that we have in the military field as well.
Sure. Okay, all right. And General, close the show for us with
I think both my colleagues have done it very well. I'll just add just a few points. And, I think over the next 1.5 years, I think so long as we can just maintain the status quo, we have not done badly. Many times in our desire to say that we need great improvements, and when that doesn't come, we feel we have failed. I think just maintaining the status quo is also an achievement. So let us just maintain what we have done so far. Number 2, try to reduce the imbalance in trade. And I think as far as the cultural connect is concerned, I think that needs to be strengthened further. And the best way to do it is through tourism. So if you could promote much greater people-to-people contacts through tourism, through education, through spiritual visits, especially on the Buddhist circuit, I think we can move a few steps ahead. And I think that is what we can look forward to in the next 1 to 2 years.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that the core issues really as far as India and China are concerned continues to remain, but there have been several positives since the Wuhan Spirit and Chennai Connect, and we are hoping that we can build on those positives and take the relationship between India and China forward in the right direction. Maybe we cannot be friends, really best of friends anytime in the near future, but as long as status